Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning, good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And today, this is going to be so much fun. We're like going back into my background when I did something along these lines about 20 years ago. I used to do some of this. And so it's going to be so much fun to be talking about this with my guest today. But we're going to be talking about giving presentations and things like that. And whether it's in person, whether it's via Zoom, whether it's in, all of these various things. And so it's going to be so much fun to talk to my guest today. So please join me in welcoming Jeff Leshay to our program today. How are you doing, sir?
Fine, thanks, Deb. It's great to see you. And glad for the opportunity to talk about storytelling, which I know is near and dear to both of our hearts.
Of course. Well, let me tell people a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into this. So Jeff Leshay is an executive presentation coach and media trainer who has enhanced the presentation and storytelling skills of senior leaders at dozens of Fortune 500 companies and hundreds of other for-profit and not-for-profit organizations. Jeff spent more than a decade as a journalist, starting at the Associated Press, and then he was an award-winning on-air television news correspondent at CNBC and several network affiliates. He later served in leadership roles at 3 of the world's largest PR firms and 2 multi-billion-dollar public companies before he founded his own firm, Leshay Communications. He is the author of 2 books and has just launched an online masterclass called Presenting with Persuasion, the premier fast track to powerful storytelling. So again, Jeff, welcome.
Thank you, Deb. Great to be here. And again, to be able to talk about the power and the potential of storytelling, of presenting effectively, which is an often overlooked and underdeveloped skill I have found.
It is. Well, you've gone through several different things in your career. They've actually all tied together very nicely. But tell us how you got to where you are today and how you discovered that this really is your passion in life.
I guess the common denominator is storytelling. So I did start my career as a journalist. I like to say that I'm still a recovering journalist, even many years after I left that profession, although I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was something I was passionate about. That's what drew me in to the business. I started in print journalism with the Associated Press. And that was a great experience, but I had become very interested in the multidimensional aspects of storytelling that TV provided, that TV news provided, the ability to be able to tie in natural sound and the visuals and to tell a story and to have people feel as if they were there experiencing what you were experiencing as you were working to inform the public about important issues that impact their lives. And so I did that for about 12 years, a couple of years in print and about 10 years on the broadcasting side, almost all TV, but radio as well. CNBC had syndicated radio segments that I did. So I got my hands in all of the different kind of media and got that kind of diverse experience. I was helped greatly by a graduate program that I'd gone through after I'd been a journalist for a couple of years already at Medill, the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern, which was a 1 year, you can get in and get out in 12 months. It was a great, pragmatic experience that did whet my appetite for TV news. And of course, if you want to work on air and TV news, you go to very small markets to cut your teeth. And so I was in Yuma, Arizona for about a year and a half, and then Colorado Springs, I think your native state, for about a year or so, and then got the opportunity to go to New York and start with CNBC when it was a very, very young budding television news network, cable network. And I had gotten more and more attracted to business reporting and financial reporting. Had not seen that kind of coming, if you will, years earlier. but I was tired of covering the murder and mayhem.
If the bleeds, it leads.
Exactly. And that really was not what I was particularly passionate about. But as I learned more about business and economic issues, it kind of drew me in to that kind of reporting in the smaller markets. And so I stacked my audition reel with my best business reporting stories, hoping that CNBC would hire me, and was lucky enough to get a job with them and spent a few years at CNBC in New York, and then transferred to Chicago with them. And then ended my journalism career with 3 years of doing morning shows in Chicago for the Fox station there. And reporting business stories periodically for the fledgling Fox Business Network at the time. But I was getting up at 2:00 in the morning. And in by 3:30. Always wanted to write all of my own copy, so that was a little more time intensive. And I've got a son at that time. He was very, very young. I seemed to be missing things and key developments in his life, his first steps, all those kinds of things, because I was working ungodly hours, 14, 15 hours a day. And I began to realize there were a lot of other ways to utilize the communication skills that are so critical to what you do, to what I do, and what so many people do. And I shifted then into public relations. And as you said, worked for a few of the big PR firms, and then in-house at 2 different public companies, heading up communications teams. And then about 11 or 12 years ago, it really sank in that what I was most passionate about doing through all of that public relations work was the media training and the presentation coaching of executives who needed to develop clearer messages and narratives, and who needed to frankly be more influential and persuasive in their communications to drive the kinds of business results they were looking for, to build their personal brands of leadership. And it was something I found that I was really passionate about. And so I hung a shingle, took a chance, was encouraged by a number of clients to do that. And knock on wood, it's been been 11 years now since I started. And I have loved every moment of it, because I get to focus on helping people tell stories and tell them in ways that go beyond being just informational to being actually influential, and getting the kinds of results they're looking for. And again, building their own personal brands of leadership.
And I love that you do this, because so many times senior executives, business owners, people at that level, they might have the opportunity to do some type of interview. They might, obviously they, are going to be doing presentations, things like that. And, like I said, this was way back in my background. I did media training, and, and I started my career in public relations at the American Cancer Society. Absolute best place in the world to do that, because our relationship with the media, and this was Denver, so at that point it was a major media, and it still is a major media outlet. We had all of the stations there and everything, and because of what we were doing, we had good relationships with everybody. The few times where there was something kind of icky, we still had such good relationships that the media, they weren't doing the gotcha type of interviews, and so. I learned there that I needed to remember, whether I was doing the interview or training somebody to do it, for the most part, they weren't wanting you to screw up. They were wanting to tell the story. And so they wanted you to tell the story. But so many times people, that camera comes on and they're like, oh my God. Or they try and do something different. So, how important is it that people have, if they have any idea that they might be doing interviews, that they have been trained in what to do?
It is so important. And it's a very different mindset. Oftentimes people go into media interviews or frankly, Q&A at the end of or during a presentation, and they fail to recognize the tremendous opportunity that exists if they're well prepared with their own agenda. And so it's taking people from a mindset of being defensive, of getting them out of the response only and survival mindset,
Right.
and into a mindset of, oh my God, I can actually really accomplish something here. I've got really important messages that I need to get across to this particular target audience to get them to do what I actually need them to do. And if I've got well-crafted messages that I've kind of personalized and really made authentic and very personable in a sense, those are really going to resonate and have far greater influence than just going into those kinds of situations with, oh my God, I just need to get through this so I'm not embarrassing my family the next day out there in public, or I'm not ticking off board members or my leadership team. Two totally different mindsets. And that fits both with media training and presentation coaching. I think that those are two ill-planned for, if you will, venues typically that people put on the back burner and don't take as seriously as they should, and fail to recognize the tremendous opportunity that exists if they are well prepared. And you're right, as a journalist, seldom was I playing gotcha journalism trying to nail someone.
You were not Geraldo.
I was not Geraldo, exactly. And far from it, I'd like to think. But what I wanted was interesting, colorful perspective, and ideally that no one else had gotten yet, that would help to color the story and educate the audience in compelling ways that kept audiences engaged. And I think that kind of mindset, that kind of building a persuasive and compelling case, plays really well both with the media and when folks are going and giving presentations. And, you know, it's funny, Mike Wallace, for the late Mike Wallace
from 60 Minutes. And
he used to say that he actually appreciated when some of his interviewees had actually been media trained, because they were better prepared to succinctly and in more compelling ways share their perspective on issues. And he'd get a better story, even if he didn't agree with their perspective. He could juxtapose it with others' perspective, and it made for really good storytelling.
Right. You know, and I think that in many ways, the media has gotten a very bad rap, especially in, say, the last 10 years or so. And there is, I think people tend to forget, because, you know, I am old school media. You know, I don't quite remember Walter Cronkite, but I'm pretty close.
I remember him.
Right. You know, and so, you know, that type of person was very different than what we have now. And there is a very big difference between media and entertainment. And I think, you know, sometimes people get those mixed up. So, you know, but that's where you need to be prepared also. You know, if you get a call and they say, hey, we want to interview you, we want to interview your boss, you know, we're so-and-so, you need to have done your research. You know, is it, okay, this is a true business reporter. This is, you know, whatever, or this might not be somebody that I want to talk to. And I always tell people, it is okay to tell them no. You know, you get that they declined to reply type of thing. But sometimes that's better than doing something that's not going to come off well.
And actually, the decline to reply isn't bad if you explain why it wouldn't be appropriate to reply at that point in time, because perhaps what they're asking you to share is speculative.
Right.
Or perhaps
there might be legal action going on.
Exactly. Or personnel issues that are quite sensitive in nature. And so usually journalists get it. It doesn't mean that they won't follow up and try to get you to reveal more, but they understand if you simply explain why it is that it's not appropriate to comment on a particular issue at a particular point in time, but to share with them that as information evolves, as issues develop, that you may be available to provide further comment on those issues, but now is not the right time. Often that's how effective crisis management goes, right? I mean, you do not want to speculate on details. You want to share just the very little bit you know for certain, and then share the compassion and the empathy that you have for the situation for those who may have been impacted. But you're not going to speculate on the cause or other details, and you're simply going to explain that to reporters. And for the most part, they totally get that.
Right. Oh, yeah, because they don't want to have to fix things later either. You know, if they have to go back and say, oh, this was said, but this was really the case, it makes them look bad.
That's exactly right.
Mhm.
Same thing, by the way, in Q&A, I
Mhm.
found in presentations
Right. Mhm.
when executives are in front of
Mhm.
their all employee team
Mhm.
meetings, if you will,
Mhm.
and they're answering some pretty challenging
Mhm.
questions. They're asked sometimes to speculate on
Mhm.
things. I mean, those same principles apply,
Mhm.
not wanting to take out a crystal ball
Right.
and guess or
Mhm.
put a stake in the ground or
Mhm.
promise something that you may not be
Mhm.
able to deliver on.
Right.
I think the wise and seasoned leaders out
Mhm.
there communicating through the media or via presentations are clear in their minds
Mhm.
in terms of what they can share and what's appropriate to
Mhm.
share now, and what those guardrails are that
Mhm.
they don't want to go beyond for the
Mhm.
time being.
Right. And then there's reactive, where they have come to you. Maybe they have appeared at your door, all of these various things. But I love the proactive, where you have this great story to tell. And like I said, I started out at the American Cancer Society. I've had the opportunity that the stories we had to tell were great, compelling stories. But, businesses have those type of stories all the time. So talk to us about how we go about doing the proactive type of media relations.
Yeah, I think that's why we're seeing, by the way, so much focus on corporate social
Mhm.
responsibility these days, companies aligning with purpose-filled organizations or
Right.
purposeful
Mhm.
organizations. And that's so important that they build that public trust, because then when they have difficult issues,
Mhm.
they may have to kind of withdraw some of
You've
that
got that
public
bank.
trust,
Mhm.
if you will, but they've
Mhm.
got that trust bank that one of my old bosses, who's uh, unfortunately passed away a few
Mhm.
years ago, Al Golan, who founded the
Mhm.
great PR firm Golan
Mhm.
Harris,
Mhm.
which is now just Golan. He used to talk about that public trust bank.
Mhm.
And companies have gotten a lot better about doing that so that they can weave that into their storytelling, especially on the back end of dealing with some very, very challenging issues.
Mhm.
But they still have got to be prepared to, as you said, proactively on their terms, get out in front of issues with the right levels of honesty and candor and transparency, and yet be influential in the ways that they're taking the right steps to correct something that may have gone wrong, for example, or to take a better course than perhaps they've been taking up until this point. So getting ahead of those issues is so important, but it requires being well prepared, developing crystal clear, succinct key messages that you build your narrative, that you build your story around. And then, so importantly, and I work with executives all the time, to personalize the storytelling so that
Right.
it's not rehearsing three key
Right.
contrived
Because that
messages.
just, when it sounds rehearsed, we don't like it. That just
No, we
isn't it.
don't. It's not authentic, and it just doesn't feel good. But when a seasoned leader can take those three core messages that are so important to communicate in any way and weave in a few of their own personal insights and anecdotes and experience that they've had that's relevant to what they're sharing, that is so much more memorable and so much more persuasive. And there are studies that show that. I get to do some work with the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern fairly frequently. And one of their professors, Mohan Sawhney, there's a great quote from him that I love. And he says, stories tend to stand the test of time because they connect with us at a deeper and more meaningful level. He says that you can share a bunch of facts with audiences, but when you then weave in your colorful take of those facts or an anecdote or an experience you may have had in a similar situation way back when, that's what becomes so much more memorable and personable. That's what people will remember, and that's what's going to influence them to take the actions we want them to take.
Right. And we've all seen the talking heads. And I think part of it is when it seems so rehearsed, it doesn't seem believable either, and
Right.
so it's, and this is typically, if it's a negative type of story, we want to see, okay, this person has a heart, they care about this, they feel really bad that they, what was the company, oh gosh, this was now several weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, the company that laid a whole bunch of people off over Zoom. And, and basically, if I remember right, it was if you are part of this call, you are in that termination thing. And then when they interviewed him, because, hello, it hit the fan. When they interviewed him, he was like, it was a business decision. Then he had to backtrack because people were like, whoa.
No empathy. Absolutely no empathy. And people generally understand that as a leader, you've got to deliver some tough messages and you have to make some difficult changes at times. But those have to be delivered in those messages in empathetic ways. In fact, a number of the top MBA programs, Kellogg included, is weaving empathy into a lot of their leadership training. They're talking more and more about empathy because it's a skill set almost, in a sense, to be able to weave that into those very difficult conversations you're having in ways that people may still not feel great about, but will at least understand you're doing the best you can and you care about them, and that caring is genuine. And it takes some practice, but empathy is becoming a bigger and bigger, more critical part of leadership communications these days.
Right. And it is tricky when you're doing an interview, especially if it is a live interview, because it's a short period of time. I mean, I used to tell people you might be interviewed for 5 minutes, but 30 seconds will air. So that is where being prepared, all of those various things definitely comes in. But it's also, you need to realize that it could be edited out. Your great answer could be edited out. But I also told people that's where you don't want to say the things like yes, but, no, but, because it edited to yes or no.
It can be taken totally out of context pretty easily. And that's why in the preparation, I seldom, if ever, recommend that people memorize content, whether it's key messages or whether you're getting ready for a presentation. You want to know that content. You want to be able to glance at a PowerPoint slide or a bullet point on a notepad that's just a couple of words that will remind you of that idea you want to share. And you may share it slightly differently each time, but it's going to feel authentic to the audience. And it is authentic because you're speaking a little bit more extemporaneously from the heart as well as the mind. And when we memorize those things, it's very difficult to not sound like you've memorized it or that it's contrived or has been created by your public relations team that said you've got to say it exactly this way. That doesn't resonate with people anymore. I'm not sure that it really ever did, but there's a lot more focus now on what I like to call adopting and adapting content. So large organizations develop key messages, which are really important. And then they have different leaders of different functional areas go out and communicate. And it's important that everybody harmoniously get those key messages across. But what's so important is for those to resonate with audiences, that each individual leader or emerging leader is adopting those key messages, but adapting them to his or her voice. And saying those ideas, sharing those ideas in ways that are comfortable and conversationally fitting with their own conversational demeanor, and adjusted or tailored for the specific concerns and interests of that audience. And it's another part of preparation that I see all too often ignored, thinking about the different audiences with whom you may need to share information, or different media with different audiences with whom you may need to share information. But how do I tailor those messages and use examples or anecdotes that I know are going to address their specific interests and concerns? And that takes a little bit of time to understand who those audiences are, what's on their mind, so that you can proactively get those important points on the table and let them know immediately why what you have to share is so important for them. So critically important.
Well, and when we memorize, like you all of the things you said, but then it's also the thing, if something stops you in the middle of that thought process, it's very hard when you've memorized it to come back to that.
Exactly right.
And we see that happen all the time, and granted, because I do this, I tend to get the giggles or something. I'm like, oh, he had that memorized, and it could be just something as simple as, the bird flies by, a phone rings. I mean, something to momentarily distract you. Your brain shuts that off, and then it's like you don't even know what sentence you were saying.
It's exactly. And that is a risk of memorization, because we're committing to our mind a string of specific words and then thinking less about the actual ideas themselves or the concepts that we're sharing. And more often than not, I find that executives are way more familiar with what they want to share than they give themselves credit for.
Right.
And they're worried, they're concerned about hitting every little element just right. The audience isn't really concerned about that. And if the presenter overlooks a little detail or something, big deal. You can always come back to that and share it later. Or if they want to ask about that, you overlooked it, you can answer it at that point in time. But people tend to put so much pressure on themselves to be perfect. And there is no perfection, I don't think, in storytelling. And the reality is, a little less than perfect tends to resonate really well because we're only human and people can relate to that.
Yeah.
And when we're presenting or doing a media interview, most people are out there thinking, oh my God, thank God it's Deb up there doing that and not me.
And I'm not having to be up there because what is it? The fear of public speaking.
That's it. Biggest, by the way, I did some research on this recently for a presentation I was doing. That is the single biggest fear noted by I think it's the mental health, mental health institute, I believe, or I forget exactly what the organization is, but there are a number of organizations that have studied this. I think 76 or 77% of the American public that were surveyed, and this was a big survey, said that was their biggest fear was public speaking. Greater than the fear of heights, and greater, I love this one, greater than the fear of spiders.
Oh, no, no, spiders.
For me, heights is a much greater fear than than public speaking.
Right,
but that's another thing. I think there are many people fear it, or at least it causes them some anxiety and nervousness. And this is true for media interviews as well as presentations. And you can channel that nervous, anxiety-driven energy into very positive energy. You can channel it in very positive ways and embrace those opportunities. But sometimes that fear and anxiety prevents people from tackling a presentation, from preparing adequately and appropriately. And they tend to then procrastinate until the last minute. And now they're almost guaranteeing that they're not,
because they're not prepared.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So preparedness is so important, but that can be done in very time efficient ways.
Right. And when I started doing this, like I said, it was very different. But the concepts are still the same. And I think what people need to realize is, when we're talking about giving a presentation, it could be to two people. It doesn't, all of these various things. And so you need to have these skills to be able to do this. And one of the things now, of course, obviously, is podcasting. I have people who I've actually, now it's really funny. I've had two people recently that I recorded interviews with. One, I knew it was his first interview. Now, my goal, is to make people think, okay, this was great. I can do this again. I'm now, an hour is a big chunk to bite off for your very first interview. I mean, but he also knew we would have a good chat and he'd listen to my programs and all of these things. And he did fine. He was perfectly fine with that. But then I had somebody who I interviewed and their program ran last week. It was great. It was fabulous. I found out today it was his first interview. I had no idea. I mean, it was his wife and I. And so, we were kind of the girls and we took took the conversation over a bit, but it came across as being, but he knew what he was going to be talking about. And that's one of the things that I ask when I'm having guests on is to prepare. I have them provide me with speaking points. So that kind of starts that process going. And so that's great. Of course, it doesn't work if somebody just appears in front of you with a microphone.
Right.
But you still should have at least some of the basics down in your head. Especially if it's your business or if there's a potential that you're going to be interviewed.
You bet. And I talk about these principles all the time, but I try never to go into any kind of venue, virtual or live in person, or even on the phone, without having a few minutes to think through what is it that I want to be able to share, and just jotting down a few words to remind me of some key concepts or principles I want to make sure to cover. I do that. I did that for this podcast. You asked just a few key questions in the form that I filled out for you, just to give you a sense of the kinds of things that I like to talk about, what I focus on, and that fit with the program. And that was actually very helpful in getting me kind of on track to think through what would be the appropriate elements to share with you. We could go with communications. You could go in so many different directions, and oh my goodness, it opens up. You say, and an hour can absolutely fly by when you talk, at least in my opinion, when you're talking about this really interesting subject of how to communicate more impactfully, more effectively, and persuasively with audiences. And that it doesn't have to be a lot of preparation, but just to get the mind thinking and on track with what are those several key points I want to make sure I get to. And if it's within your wheelhouse, it's your area of expertise. Most people that you have on, if not all people you have on as a guest, probably could speak for hours on their topics. No problem at all.
Because they are experts in that. And granted, most of this is a business type of topic and things like that. But, I've had people on, their personal story always comes in. And story, again, is a very important part of it. And that's part of why I asked that question at the start. Tell us about yourself and how you got to where you are today. It's not, we're diving right in. Part of that too is to relax them. Even though people say they don't like to talk about themselves, it's really funny. It does tend to relax them when I say, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Absolutely. And when I'm working with executives, oftentimes they've got a team, because oftentimes it's a CEO or CFO or an SVP at a company, and they've got a team that's pulling together their slides for a presentation or their talking points for a media interview. And oftentimes there's some really good message points there and some key pieces of evidence, what we like to call proof points, that are specific examples or facts or statistics that provide that persuasive evidence. What's not there most of the time, or almost all of the time, is anything that's personalized to that particular individual who's going to be.
The team might not know it.
That's exactly right. And so one of the key areas that I work with folks on is, how do you take those key messages, and I'll work to help develop the key messages too, but how do you take those and really personalize those messages in ways that only you would deliver to audiences? And by the way, one of the things I'm most passionate about, and that ties to Q&A as well, because so many people go into Q&A with this survival mindset instead of,
what are they going to ask me? What are they going to ask me?
What are they going to ask me? And can I survive? As opposed to recognizing, in my view, that Q&A may be the greatest opportunity for you to get across compelling messages and to personalize those a little bit, because you're actually going to be getting that information across on someone else's terms. They've asked you the question. So there's a model that I use that goes beyond just responding to the question. We do want to credibly and honestly, as best we can, respond to questions. But the huge opportunity then is the ability to be able to what we call bridge back, segue back to your key messages, lead that discussion back to reaffirm those particularly important points that you're there to get across in the first place, and to personalize them in colorful. And each time you hit a key message, you're going to share it a little bit differently, and you might be able to share a different personal anecdote, or at least a phrase that reflects your genuine passion, conviction in the strategy that you're laying out, in the optimism that you have for the future, whatever that is. Huge opportunities. And that's where I see the greatest level of missed opportunities when people are giving presentations or doing media interviews, certainly, where they're simply responding and not leading the discussion in very productive, influential ways.
And it's gotten the bad name of spin, but it is about taking it and I hate to say twisting or maneuvering, but getting back to what you wanted to do. And I remember years ago when I was at the Cancer Society, we had something going on, and I had this wonderful volunteer who did my media interviews. I've actually interviewed her on this program. She is a wonderful, delightful woman, a true PR expert. I mean, she knew what she was doing. And I don't remember if we were talking about breast cancer or prostate cancer. But as you can imagine, sometimes you could get giggly with some of those questions. And one of the radio programs that we put her on, the two guys were in their early 20s. And they wanted to take, and like I said, I don't remember which one of those topics it was, but they wanted to take those topics down into the giggle fest. She let them do that. And she kind of laughed along with them. And then she very gently said, "That's great, but here's what I'm here to talk about."
Perfect.
And and she did it in a way that they didn't feel chastised, that they didn't feel anything. I mean, because she went along with it. She didn't cut them off. She didn't say, "Look, boys," she just said, "Hey, that's great. That's really funny. But let's talk about the serious aspects of this." And they immediately responded. I mean, and she said it was really funny because they physically responded also. They were the 12-year-old boys, then they were the professionals. But she knew exactly what she was doing. But again, it came back to the fact that she was prepared.
And that's the difference between kind of what I view as spin, or what the media often call pivoting.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Pivoting. And when you hear the media say, "Oh, the congressman or woman pivoted on that issue," what they're often saying is they dodged the question. They really didn't acknowledge the question, respond directly to the question, but went straight to their message. When people do that, in my mind, they lose total credibility.
Right.
And
because you're like, now wait a minute. And a good reporter will take them back to that. They'll say, "That's great, but I asked about."
Exactly. So why not, credibly address that question? And instead of pivoting or spinning, you're listening, you're responding as best you can to what they've put out there as a question, but then you are proactively leading that discussion back in conversational ways to your agenda. And when you're armed with a compelling agenda, with the right kinds of messages and the right kinds of personalization, the audiences are going to be really happy to have you go back to that place, because you've planned those messages in a way that are going to resonate with that particular audience, that is meaningful to that particular audience. And so things come up in presentations. People interrupt. People interject that kind of humor, if you will.
They drop a tray of glasses.
Exactly. Silly to try to ignore it. Why not embrace it, acknowledge it?
Yeah. Are y'all okay?
That discussion back to the right place. Exactly.
Well, and it is funny when you're watching an interview or listening to something and something happens and they don't acknowledge it. It's kind of like, okay, what was that big crash? Because then you're thinking, what was that big crash? Why aren't they talking about that big crash? And then you get stuck on what was that big crash as opposed to what they're talking about.
And in the virtual world, oh my goodness, where do we start in terms of the potential distractions that occur when we're having to communicate so much of the time now in virtual platforms? And I tell people, I had someone a few weeks ago, his cat jumped right up on the keyboard. We were in the middle of a coaching session. And literally, he was in the middle of practicing. I was recording him so that I could play it back. And the cat jumps up. And he kind of like tried to ignore it and push the cat away.
That's when you pet the cat and you...
Exactly. Make a joke. Say, you know what? That's the virtual world we're in, folks. I'm sorry for the cat. I'll try to scurry him out of the room and get back to what's important here.
I had that happen on one of my interviews last week. And the cat jumped up. And, we talked about the cat because, the cat was there. And the cat laid down in his lap. And that was fine. And then later on in the interview, up from the bottom of the screen comes this paw. And it was kind of like, hello.
That's funny. That's great.
And I let it go, and far more people listen to the program than watch it. And so, but I finally had to acknowledge it because I was just about to crack up because this little paw was just, hello.
No, but to be sure, we can minimize in these virtual platforms some of the distractions to turn off the pings and dings of email and messages coming in and the phone and all of that. I do try to block out as much as I possibly can from an audio perspective so that I can stay focused on the matter that we're discussing at any point in time. And you and I have talked in the past about the importance of having a good microphone, a decent microphone that picks up your voice clearly. You know, it's interesting. I work with some very senior level executives at large companies, and I can't believe how often they'll lead a team meeting or hold a conversation, and they are, way down here in the screen,
or you're looking up their nose.
Too much headroom.
I love it. I'm like,
or they're way too close, and you're seeing, I'm not an ear, nose, and throat specialist. It's too much information for me. Instead of having a nice executive presence in the virtual world, which I would argue is every bit as important as when you're there in person, because the reality is we're having to engage audiences and compel them and influence them, reaching through these technology barriers. And that is very tricky. And we've got to use our voice. We've got to have a good commanding presence. We need them to trust us, to believe in us as leaders and emerging leaders, and even young people in their careers who have that kind of presence, I think, are going to ascend in their careers that much more quickly. And it's just as important in the virtual world, if not more so, than when we're there in person, because it's a way to stand out, but because of the need to really reach through these technology barriers and compel audiences to do what we need them to do. I had a great deal of difficulty myself in TV news in my early days, being myself and getting comfortable looking into a camera lens or a teleprompter when I was in the studio and being conversational. I was hideously uncomfortable. And if you don't believe me, I could grab my wife and bring her in here and she will attest to that. And this was back when there were still VHS tapes, and she would tape some of my segments, and I'd come home and we'd pop it in because I wanted to learn to get better. And I'd watch myself, and I, honest to God, want to crawl under the sofa or pack my bags and leave town. It was so uncomfortable. It took me a long time to learn to get comfortable in this kind of a medium. And it's practice. It's practicing aloud. It's practicing having the steady eye contact at or near the camera as much as possible during virtual calls. But I am seeing that kind of presence pay off time and again for executives who are getting feedback from their teams and from their leadership colleagues or from their boards saying, oh my goodness, what a difference in your communication or in the quarterly call with analysts or whatever that particular venue is. What a difference we noticed in your presence and level of persuasiveness, frankly.
And I think we absolutely have to embrace and acknowledge that this virtual world is not going away.
No.
I think it probably was coming no matter what, and the pandemic sped it up. But the cool thing is now we can communicate with people around the world. We don't have to go in. Now, I love in person. I mean, especially as a speaker, because you feed off of that energy. And it's really hard when it's the screen and, and
when
all
the little
these
video clips of people are tiny and you can't really see their facial expressions.
And then they turn their camera off and you're like, uh-oh. Right. And so, there's all of these things, but we can figure out how to do it. And part of it is, and we were talking about this before, what things look like behind us. The first couple weeks of the pandemic, it was okay to have the bed behind you because you had to take over somebody's bedroom.
Right.
But then, get a screen, do something. It was one of the times when I was interviewing somebody, and I mean, they're seeing what I'm seeing. And so this was the funniest thing. He was in his kitchen, so he's at his kitchen table. That's great. Not everybody had the ability to have a home office. Well, partway through the interview, son comes in, makes himself a sandwich. Now, he never made a sound. I mean, it was the funniest thing in the world. Makes himself a sandwich. Every once in a while, he'd look at us. And I finally said, hello.
Called him out.
Kind of like the cat walking across. But I had somebody else that I was talking to, because we were talking, it was a seminar I was on, and we were talking about how as a public speaker, it's now very difficult because, like I said, we're not in front of the crowd. We're not feeding on that. And what he has done, and he does lots and lots of presentations, he does it like he was still in front of people. So his camera is further away. He is standing. And now he also has the technology where he's got a couple cameras, he can very quickly switch back and forth between them so that he's got some close-ups and he's got some further aways. But to me, this is fascinating. I mean, we had somebody the other day that had it's not a whiteboard, it was clear glass. And he wrote on it, and of course it was reflecting. As he told us, I'm not writing backwards.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was just fascinating with the technology. And then he would walk over and sit down at his desk. Now he clearly had camera people, and he had more than one camera.
Yeah.
So they were doing all this, but it made this presentation so interesting because it wasn't the talking head just sitting
Right.
here. And I mean, it really was very good. So I think for people who really are going to embrace that they're going to do this, it's time to think about what can we do? How can we make it more than the talking head?
Exactly. And if you have that kind of additional technology, that can play really well if you know how to play with it well.
Right.
But for many people who don't have the multiple camera angles or the multiple monitors and whatnot, it's all the more important that they use their voice in engaging ways and the body language. I mean, I see people standing or sitting perfectly still when they're doing calls. And
now they shouldn't be doing the weeble wobble.
Or rocking, right? or just repetitive motions that make you seasick. And instead of trying to just gesture as they normally would, that's why I like to be back a little bit, kind of a head and shoulders shot in the virtual world. It's great if you're moving your hands. If you want to point out three key things and you're holding up,
you hold three fingers up.
Right. And for myself, because I know I tend to get a little bit serious sometimes about issues, and I might look like I'm overly concerned. At least this is what my family has told me over the years. I actually keep in my desk drawer a couple of photos that I have cut out of groups of smiling faces, just in magazines.
So you're talking to them.
And I will tape that on a little cardboard backing to the back of my laptop near where my camera is to remind me to lighten up, dude. The world's not falling apart. This isn't that serious. To remind me to smile when there isn't anybody else in the room smiling with me. And so there are all sorts of little tips and tricks that you can implement to try to make it a little bit more personable so that it feels to you and it feels to the audience as much as if you're there in person as we possibly can create. Right. It is really important.
And you mentioned one of the key words, and that's practice. And I remember when I was truly doing media training, there was the interviewer, and all of these various things, but we filmed them. And then we would look at it and we would critique. And it was always interesting because you got the fidgeters.
Yes.
If you're, and I said, we are not going to put you in a chair that rocks.
Right. Or swivels.
Or rolls. Right.
Yeah.
I'm in a chair that, I can do this, but I also plant my feet. I don't cross my legs because then I'm not going to do the weeble wobble thing. And one of the things that we discovered also, and with men typically, was they did the key jingle or the coin jingle. They had their hands in their pockets. Oh. And, and so we're like, anything in your, and it was comfortable for them to stand that way. And that was fine. We wanted them to be in that comfortable pose, but it's get everything out of your pocket so that you're not doing the jingle jangle thing.
Yes. Except I find, to be honest with you, that when we're in front of live audiences, even if they don't have the keys or the jingle jangle of change in their pocket, that they're not keeping their hands in their pockets as many guys like to do. They kind of walk around the stage and because it's very constraining. Why not just have the hands comfortably just up in front so you can gesture and reach out and embrace that audience in ways. And it's equally important in the virtual world. I really believe it is because, again, we're having to reach through this barrier and grab them. Right. And by the way, openings and closings.
Oh, yes.
In person or virtually are so important. I like to talk about unconventional beginnings to presentations. The last thing you probably like to see, as is the case with me, is when someone in the virtual world or in person gets up, introduces themselves by name, give their name.
Hi,
rank,
I'm Deb Creer. I'm going to talk to you today about.
And here's my agenda slide. The three things we're going to. Oh, so let's go to A, and then we'll go to B and C. And I'm thinking, oh my God, and how long is this thing?
That's when we turn our cameras off, right? Because
exactly.
Then they're not going to notice we're not paying attention.
At best, it's why we turn the cameras off. If not, get out of there completely. So think of creative ways to grab their attention right away. And there are a lot of those. And sharing starting with a personal story or anecdote or a startling statistic or fact to grab their attention, something that's going to blow their mind, or a favorite personal quote that's relevant to the topic you're going to address. There are lots of ways to do that.
Watch jokes. We all know jokes can go wrong.
There's a high risk factor there. I don't tell people absolutely not to do it. If they know the audience really well and they understand who they are and what's on their mind, and then an appropriate bit of humor may succeed. But if it falls flat, it's a really awkward way of trying to get momentum going at the start of a presentation. But and the other big missed opportunity is at the close of presentations or the close of interviews, where a reporter says anything else you want to mention, and someone says, I think you covered it all. And I'm thinking, no. Huge softball opportunity to summarize the essence of what you shared. What's the most important takeaway? What's the lead of the story or the headline you'd love to see? What's the most important point you want that audience to remember when they walk out of the auditorium? And then what's the call to action? What is it explicitly that they can do to learn more or to pitch in or rally around the strategy even better? And what are you going to do to help them do that? So summary and call to action, two elements that so often I see missed. I see people hit their last slide and then it's like, who am I tossing to next? And they hand the baton off. Huge missed opportunity to really summarize the essence, the key takeaways that they've shared with that audience.
Right. And because I was going to say, because I know what I'm doing, because I've done so many of these, I lob that softball. We get to the end of the interview and I say, and we're not quite there yet, but I will say, so what final thought do you want to leave us with? And I prepare people. I tell them I'm going to ask that. And most of the time they're okay with it. They've got one. Every once in a while I have somebody who says, nope, we covered it all. And then I kind of get the deer in headlights look, right? Because there's always something you can say, even if it's just, thank you so much for this opportunity. I've had a great time talking with your audience. Don't just, okay, I'm done.
No, because, and sometimes you get that totally open-ended question at the end, but you also get it at the beginning of media interviews where a reporter says, tell me about what's going on. Tell me about your new product or your new service, or tell me what you know about this trend or this issue that we're here to talk about today. You can, if you're well prepared, you need to be ready to take that conversation in the direction that you know is going to be most productive and beneficial for the organization that you're representing. So both of those are huge opportunities that I often see missed. Sometimes those open-ended softball questions throw people, even sometimes fairly well prepared people, because they were thinking the questions were going to be very specific in nature. And then they're almost overwhelmed by the question and they think, oh my God, I could go in 10 different directions. Which one should I go in? Well, you should make that decision before the presentation or before the interview so that very specifically the roadmap for those messages you're going to get to and get across come hell or high water in an interview or presentation.
And one of the fun things, when we're talking about tech, is be prepared for the fact that tech can go wrong. It's we used to have to plan on, okay, what if the overhead projector doesn't work? Now it's, what if the camera doesn't work? What if, all these various things. So you need to be prepared for that. What if your microphone isn't working? All of these things, because if you're prepared for that, you're still going to have your messaging in mind and you're not going to be thinking about all of those things. Now, there's ways, and you and I did this at the very start. We tested mics. We did all of those things. Sometimes you can't do that because it's, something that happens very quickly. but you can still have prepared for that and know, okay, well, if I can't do a screen share, I had better be able to still talk about what my slide showed. And I see that probably at least once a month where we poke the buttons, we spend 10 minutes poking the buttons, we never get the presentation up, and then it's done. You know, I'm sorry if your slide doesn't work when you hit share and it doesn't work the first couple of times, give up.
Yep, exactly. I always keep a backup, a printed out version of slides just in case that happens. I also use these with clients, the handy dandy two-sided laminated cards that I give them as leave behinds that summarize typically the kinds of things we cover. So I'll keep one of those handy too, just as a checklist to make sure that I'm covering the right elements that we were scheduled to cover, and that I'm not leaving anything, that they're not missing something because we had some kind of technical problem. Right. And I got to tell you, sometimes when technical problems occur, I find that the presentation opportunity becomes even more intimate and more resonant because now we're really human. We're winging it a little bit from a technology perspective, but what a great opportunity to show your expertise and how well you know the subject matter. And how much,
and you're not going to be reading it from your slide, whether it's on the screen in front of you or behind you, right? We love the speakers that are doing that. I'm staring behind me the whole time.
And every time you do that, you disengage from the audience and you lose that important eye contact. And I probably just disengaged from the mic as well because I turned away from it now.
I know.
Don't hear me as well.
Yeah, I've done that before. I'm like, I can't hear you, and then I realize it's because I unplugged myself.
Exactly.
Well, oh my gosh, Jeff, we have to do this again. I would love to chat with you again because there's so many things that we could continue talking about. But for people who are going, okay, I probably do need help in this, what are the services that you offer, and then how do people connect with you?
Sure. Well, let me segue into that just briefly. To share one of my favorite quotes is, stories are the single most powerful weapon in a leader's arsenal. And that's not for me, that's from a guy named Howard Gardner, who's a professor emeritus at Harvard. Presentations, and for some folks, media interviews are, I think, the most overlooked skill set in the corporate world, in the organizational world. Tremendous opportunities exist there. And seeing these opportunities being missed for many years. And then when COVID hit and everything was virtual, I was working on another book that was going to be, and still will be at some point, a leader's guide to communicating on the fly. How do you quickly, swiftly develop key messages and personalize them and communicate effectively in a variety of venues? Well, when COVID hit and online courses really began to take off even more, I said, you know what? I'm going to shift the content that I've written for the book into an online course, because a lot of my clients at the very senior levels of organizations have frequently said to me, you know, Jeff, this coaching, this training, presentation coaching, media training is so useful. I wish we could share this with hundreds of others through the organization, but we don't have the budget to put them all one-to-one through the coaching programs or in small groups. And that was the impetus to develop an online course that we just launched. It's called Presenting with Persuasion. You mentioned it earlier, the premier fast track to powerful storytelling. It's about 2.5 hours of video instruction from me with slides, with about 8 worksheets and checklists to coach people through my APEX approach. APEX is capital A, capital P, capital E, little x. Anticipate, prepare, execute. The 3 key stages of developing and delivering compelling content in any kind of venue. And I'm so proud of everything that I included in this course, and I'm getting some really good feedback already. It's not as personalized as the coaching or training is, but it is everything that people need, seasoned presenters and newbies alike, people just entering their careers who need to present more effectively. It's got everything in there, soup to nuts, and I'm really proud of it. And because this is good marketing 101, I've been told, I'm not really a marketing guy, but I developed a free ebook that is called 5 Presentation Tips for Wowing and Wooing Your Audience in 30 seconds or less. And there's a site you can go to. It's called presentwithpersuasion.com.
Okay.
presentwithpersuasion.com.
Mhm.
People can download if they just want the free ebook, that's great. Download the free ebook. I think it's got some great tips in there for attention grabbing openings. And then if you're interested in refining all of your presentation and storytelling skills and managing Q&A effectively, I've got lots of content in the course, and that will lead you to find out more about the course as well. That's my promotion. That's me selling.
Well, and your website is lashaycommunications.com.
Correct. That is correct. And there it lays out various professional services, media training, presentation coaching, investor-focused communications coaching, if you will. I'm doing a lot of that with public companies and startup organizations looking to go public or looking to bring in more investment dollars. I do a fair amount of work with startups as well. And so LashayCommunications.com has that. And the course is also listed on that homepage too. Okay. So
perfect.
Those are two, I think, really good avenues to learn a little bit more if people are interested.
I love it. I love it. You know, and like I said, this gets back to my roots. And so I think this is just so much fun. But I also think it's absolutely critical because we are doing more online. We need to come across as being professional. When we're doing stuff in the real world, we need to have all of these things in mind also. And so I think that it's just important for any business person to be thinking about, you know, how are they going to be persuading people and, you know, learning more about how to do it effectively.
Exactly. It's the difference between just being informational or giving an update or turning that into an opportunity to be really influential and persuasive. Huge difference there. Right. And the latter is what's going to boost our business results and help us in our careers.
Perfect. I love it. Well, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with? See, there we go.
Just to say thanks so much for the opportunity. This is obviously a topic, again, that's near and dear to both of our hearts. It's so much fun to talk about this. Again, it's the most overlooked opportunity, I think. Presentations can be and should be embraced, and you can learn to deal with that anxiety and that nervousness and channel that in very positive ways. And again, presentation skills, I believe, are the single most career enhancing skill that oftentimes HR professionals and talent development teams overlook in all of their professional development tools. Not often enough do we see presentation skills in there.
I love it. I love it. Well, I have been having so much fun talking, with Jeff Leshay from Leshay Communications. I'm Deb Creer. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.